Okay, so at this point, I think everyone would have heard about the CIA's alleged involvement in Jamaica during the 1970s. Now, persons who believe that the CIA were involved are normally PNP, and persons who say not Nagoso are usually labor rights. Now, on the quest for truth, I don't believe that we should be internalizing history. I think we should just see history for what it is with clear lens and try to understand what happened so we can learn from it. So the subjective thing is irrelevant, it doesn't matter. Just see it for what it is and learn from it. So the book that we'll be looking at is Struggle in the Periphery. And this is a book that was written by Michael Manley in 1982, where he's giving his account of Jamaica from the 1920s, 30s, from his father's time, Alexander Bustamante's time, to his time in the 1970s, 80s with himself and Edward Siaga. Go and read the book for yourself. But the chapter that we'll be looking at is Tackling Destabilization. In my efforts not to bore the listener and the watcher, I'll skip through some of these paragraphs by just telling you the idea of the paragraph and moving on. So, by the end of 1975, Jamaica had become like a time bomb. The atmosphere was charged, a program of change had begun, and some of its effects were being felt. Crime was the cause of mounting fear. Inflation, running at 20.6% in 1974 and 15.6% in 1975, was eroding not only hard won living standards but confidence in the future as well. No one could fail to notice that something was seriously amiss in the world, and some might be tempted to feel that the old order of things was under serious assault, if not on the verge of collapse. Who and what was to blame? Obviously, we were responsible for the program of change and could not escape some responsibility for the crime situation, since that is something governments are supposed to be able to deal with. Inflation was certainly not our fault, and we could hardly claim credit or accept blame for the state of the world. And what he's referring to here is, I remember reading a CIA document where they were saying, yes, Manley could be blamed for mismanaging the economy, but there were some things that you could not have blamed him for. And at that time, they were all spikes. And when he came into power, he literally walked into that. So as it relates to that, you could not blame him. But there are other things that he could be blamed for. So he's saying that the degree to which we were responsible for the decline in the economy was a major point of controversy. These were ripe times for propaganda and agitation, particularly from the right. When Kissinger launched with me at the height of the Angola crisis, the JLP was well into his program of opposition. Under its new leader, red baiting was the order of the day. Top priority was given to ceaseless anti-communist propaganda at every level and on every conceivable occasion, right? And if you know anything about that time, the JLP, when Michael Manley talks about propaganda, he's talking about the fact that the JLP was telling people that yes, Cuba is going to take over Jamaica. Michael Manley and Castro are friends. Communism is coming here. They're coming to take away what is yours. Blah 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 blah. You know. So he's saying nothing was spared. Facts and truth were simply disregarded. Initially, I was to wonder why this savage and at first seemingly unproductive emphasis. Later, the meaning was to become quite clear. The second aspect of the JLP campaign was more logical. It seemed the economy. Of course, and nothing wrong with that. Oil prices hit us hard, as had world inflation and the recession affecting aluminum and tourism. A lot of money had been spirited out of the economy by the defecting members of the upper classes. Nobody had ever felt inflation at the levels they were smiting the people during those times. All this, plus the attempt to run a wide range of new institutions, placed enormous strain on the government management sector, which was inevitably not altogether prepared to cope with problems of such magnitude. The opposition clearly had a pipeline right into the system and penetrating close to the top. It became commonplace for them to make dramatic revelations about the state of the economy, and in particular about national finances. Almost invariably, these statements would be based on information contained in documents prepared under oath of secrecy for the government at its request. Interesting ethical questions will always arise about secret government documents. In the end, there can be no hard and fast rules. Official secrecy cannot become a blanket under which malpractices are hidden. So this whole chapter now is Michael Malley saying that yes, We understand that the people need to know what is happening, why it is happening, when it is happening. But if nothing is kept secret, then the enemy also knows. Like, think about it in the sense of the United States. Like, sometimes people say, oh, we want to know exactly what is happening. We want to know what the United States is doing and whatever, 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 whatever. If you know exactly what is happening, my brethren, then the enemy also knows what is happening, quote unquote. Take that as you may. But everyone, you understand, so you must be able to see the problem in that. So he's saying here that common sense tells us that an opposition has the responsibility to accept this principle unless it is of the view that wrongdoing is afoot and must be exposed. So if it is a case where you cannot rationalize what the party in power is doing, then you have to be a whistleblower and tell the people and what go on. But if in yourself you can see why secrecy is of utmost importance, then just leave it alone. So he's saying that there was no wrongdoing in the Jamaican government, but rather an anxious search for answers to a deepening economic crisis. On the other hand, the opposition had clearly established an effective espionage network so that it could appear to the public in the role of economic wizard and prophet of doom. If the figures with which you play this game are the very figures prepared for the government by its own experts, you are at least certain that your reputation as prophet cannot be shaken because of the inaccuracy of your information. This reached such a pass that late in 1975 an actual cabinet submission was published in the local opposition daily newspaper, having found its way there through parliamentary opposition. The whole sordid episode eventually led to a court trial. A cabinet member was acquitted and, appropriately enough, found his way into the ranks of the opposition party. Interestingly, his permanent secretary was convicted at first instance. The decision was later reversed by the Court of Appeal. Now, this paragraph now is Mike Manley talking about the Gleaner as a conservative newspaper, and he's saying that they were founded in 1834, and since then, every position that the Gleaner has taken has been that of the status quo or the establishment. Right? So they're saying that after 1865, their views were those of the mother country. Right? After World War II, their views was those of the Washington establishment. Right? It had rejoiced in the hanging of Bogle and Gordon and hounded Marcus Garvey in these words. So this was around the time when Marcus Garvey was supposed to come back to Jamaica, and they're saying that Marcus Garvey is going back to Jamaica, and it is with more than profound regret that we picture any leader of thought and culture in this island associating himself with a welcome giving team. So they're saying that, okay, Marcus Garvey is this big man in America. Some people hate him, but a lot of people love him. He's representing black power all over the world and loving yourself. And they're saying that if he comes to Jamaica, no one of notoriety should go and greet him. They don't want that. Right? And then the next chapter now they're talking, the next paragraph now, they're talking about the fact that in the later years, the Gleaner eventually started supporting Bustamante, but that was only because he became a champion of the anti-socialist cause. Because they're saying that when Bustamante was arrested on May 24, 1938, and the riots and the strikes were happening, the Gleaner wrote that no doubt many good people will breathe easier at the thought of Bustamante in jail, right? And it says even then there was none of the content with which it battered Garvey. So we know what the Gleaner is based on what he's saying. So we're saying we should not be surprised when the PNP is trying to do something different and they're on the opposing side of that, because they've always been for the establishment, according to Michael Manley. There were other instances as well where the Gleaner showed them true form. So, for example, they're saying that on May 23, 1938, it had commented upon the disturbances at a sugar estate named Frome. There had been riots and workers had been shot and killed. Men and women were letting it be known that they could not continue as underpaid wage slaves, free in name only. So what did the Gleaner comment now? The Gleaner commented editorially. It was noted that persons from Cuba or certain persons here receiving emoluments from the Communist Party in Cuba were responsible for the recent From riots and the present strikes in the island. So basically everything will happen is communism and Cuba. You understand? So he's saying that the paper could not but respect Norman Manley's unrivaled gifts of intellect, advocacy, and discipline application, but oppose him throughout his career, right? Whereas it was constantly fulsome in his praise of the conservative Bustamante during his lifetime, it reserved its warmer thoughts on Norman Manley till he was safely in his grave. With every breath he drew, Manley challenged the structures and assumptions of colonialism. The system was unsafe in his presence. It must be next to impossible for outsiders to understand a newspaper coming to occupy so dominant a position in the life of a country as the Gleaner does in Jamaica. The paper has been the only source of popular reading in the country for so long that it has become a part of the country's unconscious system of habits. One often notices the fact that Jamaicans in a foreign country do not ask for a newspaper but inquire whether they can see the Gleaner because the Gleaner is so big in Jamaica, right? That when they're going elsewhere, they're thinking that they're going to see the Gleaner as well, and they're just thinking that okay, the paper is called the Gleaner. If you understand that, so you're like, oh, you want a Gleaner, meaning they want a paper. You know what I mean? The same way how people see the Washington Post, the same way how people see the New York, the thing. That's how people looked at the Gleaner at that point in time, right? So he's saying that for the establishment and most of the middle class, the Gleaner sets the daily agenda in Jamaica. It has the power to invest particular events with a moral or immoral character. For example, and he's talking about when he reported here that a certain company had increased its exports by 115%. He's saying that the figure was wrong and they battered him for deliberate dishonesty. But he said that on another instance, when a conservative prime minister made a similar error, the paper made it clear that ministers will make mistakes occasionally, right? And he's saying that this was a minor incident when compared with many others. So when he makes a mistake, it's deliberately dishonest. When the conservative man makes a mistake, everyone can make a mistake, right? So he's saying now that by 1975, the Gleaner was on a warpath. It had not yet attained the levels of orchestrated venom which were to mark its performance later, but it was already sounding a strident cacophony of abuse and sowing the seeds of discord and suspicion wherever it could. From that time, the Gleaner was in fact indistinguishable from the opposition in its tactics similar to that of the notorious El Mercurio in Chile. In the meantime, the foreign press began to campaign against us as well. The first clear sign emerged when a writer from the Wall Street Journal wrote a piece which was strikingly similar to the James Reston article following Kissinger's return from Jamaica, right? And on that visit, Kissinger was basically telling Manley that, yo, we want you to kind of separate yourself from Cuba and denounce them in a way, denounce their trip to Angola to defend Angola from South Africa. And Manley was like, okay, I'll look into it and I'll see if what they're doing is wrong and if Angola doesn't want them there. And when Manley looked into it, he was quite fine with what Cuba was doing because in his mind, Angola was okay with it. Kissinger never liked that. So an article came out about Jamaica following that, about Cuban troops being on the ground and Cuba taking over Jamaica, the regular thing, right? So he's saying now that the peg upon which he hung the story was a demonstration stage outside a Kingston hotel where the IMF was holding its annual gathering of finance ministers. News got out that a South African would attend the conference. So what happened is that the South African arrived at the insistence of the IMF authorities. Right? So the finance people from the PNP were not protesting against the IMF. They were protesting against apartheid, given that the South African individual was there, right? The Wall Street writer used this simple episode to write a scurrilous piece about Jamaica. Every sort of claptrap and lie about Cuba's presence in Jamaica was trotted out. I was subsequently to learn that the particular writer is believed to be one of the hacks the CIA keep to do their dirty work when they want to start hatcheting a country or a foreign political figure. During 1976, there was a mounting flood of American articles against Jamaica. Some would make honest and even telling comments about our economic difficulties. Some frankly disagree with our policies or took exception to our democratic socialism. Still, others expressed resentment of our non-aligned position and our relations with Cuba. All this was fair enough, though it was tedious to have to explain over and over again the relationship with Cuba was no closer than that of Mexico and Venezuela. His friendship with Fidel Castro was no closer than the one he enjoyed with Pierre Trudeau or Julius Nyerere. Whatever. Quite different were the increasing articles which represented us as a communist surrogate, a cat's paw of Soviet and Cuban adventurism. These sought to prove their charges by describing Cuban troops stationed in Jamaica and making similar line references. No, think about it. To conceal Cuban troops in an island as small as Jamaica would be impossible. Clearly, this kind of coverage was part of a plan and not an element in the spontaneous reaction of a free press. But these media efforts of the opposition were like the nuisance factor that irritates but does not altogether destroy. The key to those times was to be found in a particular kind of organized violence which passed itself off as crime but was really something quite different. Alright, so in this paragraph now, he's talking about how in 1974 he introduced controversial legislation in which he made the illegal possession of a firearm a crime punishable by a mandatory life sentence. So we can't do beat Andrew and Andrew for 15 years now because this is something that has happened before. Though I don't know how the crime rates looked in the 1970s versus in the 2020s. I am not sure. But what I do know is that we're high right now and we were high then, you know? So, during this time, political violence was becoming serious. There was a period during 1975 when the leaders of our party in the ghetto areas of the western section of the capital were on the verge of panic, right? And we know how the thing goes. It's a whole but oh my god, it got so bad, right? The doors of well-known PNP supporters would be kicked down at night, right? The PNP fight, but the PNP did what they thought that they had to do, but it should not be mistaken to think that they were the oppressors or they were the aggressors. No, they were only reacting to what was being done by the JLP, right? They thought about doing a state of emergency, but they were concerned at the time because of how a state of emergency looks to the rest of the world. Countries with a state of emergency obviously have problems. And now that would be a hit now to tourism. That's what they're thinking about. And that would be a hit to hit to his leadership at the time because what that would show now to him is that he's not in control of his country's affairs. Right? So he's saying that as things went from bad to worse, it became clear that we were dealing with something far more sinister than ordinary crime. The word that has emerged in modern lexicon to describe what we were experiencing is destabilization. Destabilization describes a situation where some source, either inside or outside the country, or perhaps two sources working in concert, one outside and one inside, set out to create a situation of instability and panic by design. Right? John Foster Dew's brother Allen has boasted of how little it cost to use agents provocateurs to create chaos in Tehran to bring down Iran's radical prime minister, excuse me. By the time the CIA was finished with Chile, many citizens and particularly members of the middle class were hysterically convinced that Allende intended to destroy everything of value in Chile, right? Jamaica in 1976 took on these characteristics. For instance, there was a terrible night when two gangs operating in neighboring areas in Kingston became locked in a vendetta. A member of one gang was killed and reprisals began. In due course, the leader of the other gang was shot dead on a main highway early one evening. Before we knew it, members of his gang had surrounded a huge tenement yard in which over 500 people were crammed into some 200 small rooms, including areas to wash, cook, and other domestic activities. Fires were set at several shacks on the outer perimeter of the old buildings and shacks that compromised the yard. The whole place went up in flames. 11 people died, the victims including 5 small children and 2 babies who were trapped in the flames and died as their parents listened helplessly to their pitiful screams. I can't even imagine that, bro. The Orange Lane fire, as it became known, shocked the society to its core. It seemed an ultimate example of man's inhumanity to man, a new dimension in senseless brutality. It was clear that the fire was a part of a gang war intended as an act of reprisal because it was believed that the gang leader's assailants had taken refuge in the yard. Michael Manley now is questioning the whole thing. Is it, however, credible to believe that a group of tough, battle-hardened street fighters would really have thought that a fire set in that way could catch equally battle-hardened and streetwise gunmen alert to a danger they knew to be imminent? We know that the incident did more than shock the national sensibility. It was quickly taken up as an example of the crime situation in Jamaica out of the government's control. I do not believe that the Orange Lane fire was simply a case of members of a gang getting angry one night. The whole history of the escalating difficulty between the two gangs reeks of provocation. The final setting of the fire suggests not anger, but the coldest calculation. Needless to say, boy, Michael, you're probably reaching. But if you know something else, you can make it clear to us. Needless to say, the official inquiry had no evidence upon which to come to such a conclusion. There had been trouble between the gangs, gang members had been killed, a fire had been set. The question is whether this was spontaneous or skillfully stage managed. Next paragraph. They were also having problems with the police, right? So they're saying that one night, some 2 members of the mobile reserve were killed. Right? So he's saying that the normal proceedings now is that if police are killed, police upset, police go out and go try to find the gunman. No. But all of a sudden, they gone on strike. He's saying that there was no industrial dispute outside that. with the government at the time, nor was there any evidence of a quarrel between the men and the commanding officer, as can sometimes occur in a security force. But he's saying all of a sudden, there's a strike. In any other country, the police would want to go out and find out who is responsible. Not so with the mobile reserve that specific morning. He's saying instead, as if on cue, certain police voices were ready to take charge of the police network, jamming the line with the most filthy abuse of the government, the security minister, and of me personally. Alright? So what he did was that he went down there. He drove down to the scene of the strike. Right? He said he still imagined that there may have been some festering grievance of which I had not been informed and which caused this completely irrational and unprecedented behavior. He was anxious to find out what was happening. Manley is saying that when he arrived at the headquarters, the police made no demands, they wanted nothing, made no claim, and consequently secured no concession. But he's saying that while they went back to work, the government credibility already took a blow. The press was filled with dark forebodings as an explanation was sought for these grim events. When even the police stopped working, things have come to a pretty pass, was the battle cry of the establishment and its spokespersons. Looking back at the events in 1976, and I have not gone into details here, I have no doubt that the CIA was active in Jamaica that year and was working through its own agents to destabilize us. They deny to this day, but I prefer the judgments of the heads of the Jamaica security forces at the time. Police, army, and special branch concord that the CIA was actively behind the events. My common sense left me no option but to agree. So that is it. That is it. So you can let me know what you think in the comment section. But the CIA has its documents out there. We know that America was pro-capitalism. Manley was talking about democratic socialism and around with Castro and and other communist allies. At the time, while he made it clear that he's not a communist, he's not a capitalist, he's trying to find the right path down the middle. We know that that did not work for the United States. Just use your common sense and look at what the United States do in other countries to know who the United States would have been supporting, and if they had the opportunity to impact the election and to impact Jamaica at the time, would they not have done so? Anyways, like and subscribe and share. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. It means a lot.